Hi there, welcome back to my channel Automate with Rakesh. In this video, we are going to learn about Robotic Enterprise Framework. And for this, I am going to use the latest available REFramework template, which is 24.10.1. This is the latest available. This was made available on 6th June 2025 by UiPath. Before we get started, it is important to know more about this course. So the Robotic Enterprise Framework, what in short we call it as REFramework. It is a UiPath Studio template. I'll show you how you can access the template and use it in practice. This is ideal for any kind of automation that you're going to put into production. Almost all the automations that is being created on UiPath platform, this is one of the important recommendation by the experts that go ahead and use the REFramework template created by UiPath. And why we have to use it, how we have to use it, we are going to learn in this course. Let's see some of the technical prerequisites. One important thing, you need to have UiPath Studio. And the version, if you look at on my computer, I have 2025.0.167. Now you can have any version which is higher than 2021.10. Any long-term supported version higher than 2021.10, you should be able to use it and learn this course. So it doesn't matter which version you have, just ensure it is higher than 2021.10. The second important prerequisite to learn this course, you need to download this UI demo. This is a sample application provided by UiPath for learning purpose. And I'm going to provide you the link from my Google Drive where you can go ahead and download this two things. One is the application, the other one has credentials. The third important technical prerequisite is you should have access to the UiPath Automation Cloud. The next thing that we should be aware is the dispatcher and performer automation model. So what is dispatcher? We are going to learn during this exercise. Don't worry, right now you have to know these two terms. Dispatcher means it is an automation component designed to upload data to UiPath Orchestrator queue. Important part is it will upload the data to the UiPath Orchestrator queue. It is called dispatcher. The second term is called performer. Now what is the job of this? Again, it is an automation component designed to process data that is already there in the queue. So one dispatcher is going to load the data. The other model, or called a performer model, is going to process the data. Automation is about processing certain data. So the performer is going to process, the dispatcher is going to upload the data what to be processed. Now this is the right time to know what is REFramework. So in REFramework, the R stands for robotic. The E stands for enterprise and a framework. So what is a framework means? A framework is a template. Like somebody would give you a presentation template or a slide template. So it's already a design made and then you add your words into that, right? A presentation you might have already worked. Similar way to design an automation, UiPath has created a template which can handle errors, which can handle different kind of situations, which is tested with various situations and it works fine. And that's why it is very, very important as a developer to learn REFramework. If you want to become a developer, the first thing you should know how to use REFramework in detail. Okay, so REFramework is a template for designing automation process. So for developing automation processes, you will use this template and then design your automation. This is called Robotic Enterprise Framework or a template. Next, I am going to demonstrate how to download REFramework template and use it inside your project. For this, you should be on your UiPath Studio. And then on the top in the new from template, I am in the start. On the right hand side, under the new from template, you would find Robotic Enterprise Framework. You can simply click on this. This is the simplest way. If you click on this, it is going to give a prompt. I'm going to go little in depth. I'm going to click on more templates. So here you would see there are so many different templates which are available. Okay, there will be many templates. Now in this you can search for RE framework. Just type RE framework. So here you would see the one from UiPath. Okay, UiPath has created. And there are few other vendors you might find. For example, here you see created by from different partners. So I would be using, or in this course, we would be using the Robotic Enterprise Framework built by UiPath. So I'm going to click on this. If you click on this, it's going to show you little more details. This RE framework was published on 6th of June 2025, 7:52 a.m. Okay, you might see the time when you open the available template. Now in the future you might see a different template, but the process and the concept remains almost the same. I have been using from last 4 or 5 years. Nothing much changed. Here and there could be small improvements, but the concept wise it remains the same. Okay, it doesn't matter which version you are using, still this course would help you to understand the concepts and how to practically use it. Now I am going to use this template. All I have to click on is use template. The moment I do this, it is going to give you a box where it is asking, hey, provide a name to this. Create a transactional business process that follows best practices for large scale deployment. You provide this project a name. So you will keep it as Robotic Enterprise Framework, my test project. Okay, just name it as my test project. We will be creating multiple REFramework projects. So for the time being, you just name it as my test project. Okay, and here also you can write it in the description. This is my first REFramework, okay, test project. And then here it will show you a location where exactly it's going to store your project. So by default, it will choose documents. So leave it as it is. And inside the documents, there will be a folder called UiPath. Inside that, you would have your projects. I'm going to show you. Okay, so this is the name we have provided. Compatibility, it will be Windows. Language, it will be VB. And then I'm going to hit on create. This is how you'll be using the template inside your very first project. Do you want to save the file main? So I had few other projects open, so it is asking me to save. It's not required. So this is what would happen to you. Okay, once you select, a project will get created. A Robotic Enterprise Framework, my first test project. Let's do one thing. Let's open the Windows Explorer and go to the documents. Okay, I'll go to my documents folder. Okay, and inside the documents folder, you would see a folder named UiPath. Okay, let me see where my folder, here it is. Now inside that, we just created a project called Robotic Enterprise Framework, my test project. You also would see one of a folder which would have the name just now which you created. Once you create a project, there are multiple subfolders, files gets created. You see there's a file called Main.xaml. This is the file which contains your real code, what you are going to develop. Okay, so just have a quick look of this particular folder. It will give you an idea. You are creating a project in UiPath Studio and where exactly it's getting written on your laptop or your computer hard drive. So this is the folder where it is getting written here. Okay, now let's go back to the studio. Now this is called the Robotic Enterprise Framework. Do you see? Now let's read it. It has something called initialization. It has something called end process, get transaction data, process transaction, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 different boxes. And we need to have good knowledge on this 4 boxes. That's all about REFramework. We need to understand what are these boxes do, how they are designed, everything in detail we are going to learn. Next, let's understand the REFramework architecture. So back onto our canvas or the UiPath Studio canvas. Here you see the very first box is termed as initialization. Now this is the very first step in REFramework. This is the very first step in REFramework. This is where the process or the automation starts. Now this, if you read, this is responsible, this particular box is responsible to read configuration, to initialize any applications that will be used inside the automation. And it checks, is everything all right before the automation starts processing. So this is about the initialization block, the very first block in your REFramework. After that, the second block is get transaction data, this box. Get transaction data. Now it can get the transaction data from an Excel, from a mailbox, from UiPath Orchestrator queue, wherever your data has to be processed. From the queue, it can get the data. From emails, it can get the data. From Excel, it can get the data. It can get from various different sources. So that can be slightly modified. While we learn this, I will teach you. But this get transaction data is basically trying to get the data which has to be processed one after the other. Imagine a queue from where all the items are there, you are processing one after the other, right? Similar way, the get transaction data pulls one item from the queue, from an Excel, or it could be an email, and then gives it for processing. So the third stage is process transaction. Initialization, get transaction data, and the process transaction is the third state. In the process transaction state, it actually processes your data. And when your data is processed, there could be three different states. Your data was processed successfully. While processing the data, there was an application exception. The application did not respond. Or while processing the data was wrong. The data was incorrect. So the data, if it is incorrect, is called business exception. If an application could not process, there is something went wrong during that time, that is called system exception. And success is a success one, the data got processed correctly. So if it is success, what happens? If you see, if it is success, it will get the next item to be processed on an application. Imagine you are filling out an application with certain data. From an Excel, you are pulling the data and entering the data into an application. So first row you have completed. Now you're moving it to the second row, completed. Third row, completed. Fourth row, the email ID was not present. So that is a business exception because certain data was not present or incorrect. When it is business exception, what the bot should do? Okay, there is a business exception. Let me move to the next record. You see, if there's a business exception, or in simple words to remember, it is a wrong data, wrong kind of a data, then it will try to pull the next data. Clear? Now system exception, while processing the data, the application got freezed or something went wrong. Then what it will do? It will connect to initialization block. You see, the system exception is getting connected to initialization block. And then it will try to reinitialize the application, reopen the application. And again, it will continue the same process, get the transaction data, process it. And this is the chain. After all your data is processed, if there is no data, then it will go to end process. That means it will close all your applications. It will smoothly shut down all the applications and then complete the process. While initializing, let's say the application itself is on a downtime. The server is not responding, the application is not opening at all. At that point also, it will directly go to end process state because the application is not there, what to automate. Getting it? So these are the four different states: initialization state, get transaction data state, process transaction state, and end process state. In the process transaction state, there could be three outcomes. It can be success, processing is success. The data could be wrong or a business exception, or while entering the application might get frozen or something happened. So that could be a system exception, and then you initialize, get the next data. So this cycle will continue, right? And then after no data is there, it is going to end it. So that is the REFramework architecture to understand on a high level. Now it's time to build a simple automation project using REFramework. Now for this, you need a couple of things. I am going to share you the link of this drive where you should download all these three files. One is the application file, the other one has the credentials, and the third one is an Excel file, which is basically a .csv file, UI demo transactions.csv. It has got certain data. Now I have downloaded all of them onto my desktop. Let me show you all of them one by one. The first thing you do, the UI demo.exe file, after you have downloaded, open this particular file. It would ask for entering the username and password. And the username and password is available in the credential for UI demo. There you have the username and the password. And I'm going to copy paste them. Okay. Now, once you have done this, let me close the file, and all you have to do, hit on login. This is the application from UiPath. There is an Excel file. Let me open the Excel file, UI demo Excel file. In this Excel file, let's try to minimize this Excel file and keep it aside. Now, all we have to do in the Excel file, we have to enter this data. If you have to do it manually, what you would be doing, for example, in the row 1, there's a value for cash in called 1. So let me enter 1 here and hit on tab. I'm doing it manually. And later, once you have understood the manual process, we will build an automation wherein all this task you are doing it manually will be done by an automation using REFramework. The next value is on us check. How much check amount we have on ourselves. So it is saying $100. So let me enter 100 and hit on tab. Then it is saying not on us check, which is not on us. Okay, not on us. And here I have to enter 50. So whatever is there in the Excel, I have to hit. And then after that, hit tab and then come to tab, and then it should come to the accept. Do you see the accept button? And then you can hit on accept. So now one amount is entered. Let's enter the second row. Okay, the second row is this, right? 2, 200, 100. So let's enter 2, tab, and then 200, tab, and then 100, tab. And then you can hit on accept. So this is what the automation has to continue to do for all the rows in the Excel. Okay, now you can see the Excel has got how many rows? Almost 300 rows it has got. So all 300 rows has to be entered by the automation inside this application. That is the goal. Now there are certain rules. What is the rule? While entering the data, the bot or the automation should also check. Let's say, for example, the cash in is 8,000. Honest check is, for example, 2,000. Okay, click outside. And then not honest check, for example, 1,000. Now what is happening? The total amount, if you hit on tab, the total amount is crossing $10,000. It is 11,000. So if an amount which crosses $10,000, it requires a special approval from the manager. That means the bot's supposed to drop an email to the manager saying, hey, for this particular transaction, right? The transaction ID is 244389. The total deposit amount is crossing $10,000. Kindly check and handle this manually. So this is a business rule. Anything more than 10,000, the bot should not process. It should drop an email to the manager. Okay, this is the business rule. Okay, and then if there are any application exceptions, let's say the application getting closed or something, it did not respond. If it happens consecutively 3 times, then the automation should automatically stop the job. It should not run anymore. It should stop. So these are the couple of rules to know before we get started. As you got the idea of what the automation would do, now it will be easy for you to implement this on the REFramework. Next, we have to learn the initialization state in REFramework. So this is the initialization state. Now let me open the state. Now when you open, you see there are multiple activities inside this, and this could be slightly confusing. What we can do to understand this, first of all, you minimize everything. Okay, let me minimize. So what do you see here? You have a state activity with an entry and exit, and inside the entry you have a try catch activity. What you should do as a beginner, you should try the same thing in a test XAML. For this, I'm going to click on design and click on this button and click on sequence. And let's write a sequence saying test and click on create. And in this test XAML, we have to experiment and we have to learn how things function. Now for that, the same thing, let's repeat exactly how the design is done. Let's repeat it here in the test XAML. For this, I'm going to click on type state. Okay, you should be in the activities. See, this is project. If you click on this is project. This is your snippets. This is your object repository. I'm going to click on this small icon here, which is called activities. Okay, click on it and I'm going to pin this. Okay, the activities pin. In this one, let's type state machine and drag and drop the state machine scope into the designer panel. And let's open this. Inside this, I'm going to drag and drop the state activity, and then I'm going to drag and drop below this a final state activity. Pretty simple. Let's go inside the state activity. Now this is exactly the replica of what you see it here. Entry, exit, transition. If I go back to the test, entry, exit, transition. Inside this, okay, inside this, before we understand the try catch block, we will take a simple experiment. The initialization state in REFramework is designed in a way if you are trying to open an application and let's say the application could not open, then it moves to end process state. This is the technical importance. If the application doesn't open, initialization means you're trying to open the application, you're trying to read the configuration. If there is any kind of an error or a problem, it should move to end process state. In this test XAML, exactly the same thing we are going to learn. I will try to open an application here, and in case the application opens, it should say successfully opened the application. In case it could not open the application, it should go to the final state. How that transition happens, let's see it. For this, I'll go inside the state activity. And inside this, I'm going to drag and drop an activity called start process. You might have heard about this activity. Let's drag and drop the start process activity. This one is saying type executable path here. Where is our executable path file? In the desktop we have kept it, right? So this is the executable file or uidemo.exe. If you click on this file, the application opens and it prompts you to enter the username and password. What we will do, we'll go back to Studio, and in the Studio, let's point out to this particular exe file, and I'm going to click on open. This type app argument, you can leave it as it is. Now, if you simply run this particular activity, it is going to open the application. For example, if I run this, okay, you see the application is opening just by running it. What we have to implement is a try catch block. What I will do, I will type try catch and I'm going to drag and drop before this activity, and this particular start process, let me drag and put it inside the try block. Okay, now it is going to try this. While trying, if there is any kind of an exception or a problem, right, then it would come to the catch section. In the catch section, let's create an assign activity. And here let's create a variable control plus K, and we can say system exception and hit on enter. This is exactly like the design it is created here in the REFramework. Okay, if you see, there is a catch section. I'm just trying to design it so that you understand the concept how it works. And here you can simply type exception and there is a system variable exception. You just have to hit on it. Okay, now there is an error. What you have to do, go to the data manager. For this particular variable just now you have created, click on data manager, and here let's make it to browse for types and say system dot exception. This is the data type you have to select and click on OK. Now the error is gone. You can minimize it. So in case there is any error while opening, this assign activity is going to pass the value to system.exception. right? When it passes the value to system.exception, then what I will go to this transition between the final state and the first state. I'll open this, and here I'm going to write system.c. When you're typing system.exception, it is not appearing. That variable is not appearing. So what you should do, go one step back. Okay, and here highlight this assign activity, go to data manager, and here I'm going to select the test. The scope I have increased to test. Let's minimize, go one step back, again once again type it here, and now type system exception. We try again, system. You see the variable has appeared. This is a symbol for the variable. So here I'm saying system exception is not nothing, meaning there is some system exception. If there is some any kind of a system exception, let's say there's an error, value of type exception cannot be converted into boolean. Okay, so let's type it again. System exception is not nothing. So this is correct. And if there is any kind of a system exception, not nothing means there is some kind of an error. So here I would like to use probably a message box. Drag and drop this message box here, and I'm going to say failed to open UI demo.exe file. Okay, I'm writing some message. So this will only come here if there is any problem on the top, then only it will come to the final state. And in the final state, right? So what I have done is, let me click on test. So instead of so here it'll say system exception dot nothing, and then it will write show you a message, and then here I can say process ends. Process ends, for example. Okay, now if it is successful, the same thing we can do. So let's say it is successful here, it is able to open the application. Under this, let's use a message box and simply say successfully opened UI demo.exe file. Something like that you can type. Now let's see if I run this end to end, how this entire thing is going to function. This is very important as a developer to know this technical aspect, how it functions. Now to debug it, there is a shortcut. What you should do for the debug, what is the shortcut key? It is F6. Okay, function key 6. So let's do that. Function F6, and the debugging has started. Okay, now let's see. It should be able to open the application. You see, it has opened the application, successfully opened the UI demo.exe. Click on OK, and it's done, right? Because we have not connected the state to elsewhere. So it is done. What I'm going to do, I'm going to open this, and in the start process, I'm going to modify this to 1, UI demo.1, meaning there is no such file called UI demo.1. Meaning there has to be some error here. If error occurs here, the catch section will catch it, and the exception variable value will have some value, and this is the error. You can also type it. Okay, so if I go one step back, okay, if I go to T1, so instead of saying fail to open, what I will do, I will just type the value of this variable system exception dot message. So whatever that variable is going to get the value, it is going to print it here in the transition. Let's save it, and again function F6. Okay, you see it has failed here because there is no UI demo1.exe. If you hit on continue, what would happen? You see the message box has come, an error occurred trying to start process. The exact problem, because there is no UI demo.1.exe with working directory folder data, the system cannot find the file specified. So that is the error which it has captured. Okay, process ends. You see it has gone to the end state. So with this demo, what have you understood? How the try catch block and the state activity functions together, and when there's a problem, how it moves from one state to the other state. This is very, very important as a developer to try it out first, understand how logically it functions. Now let's get back to the main.xaml. So in this one, if you minimize everything, you see there's a try catch block, and inside the try catch block, let's minimize everything. Okay. So here what you see, this arrow is a try, and inside that try, you have couple of things. What are those? You have an assign activity. Initially, we are assigning system exception is nothing. Okay. And then there is a if activity. We will read that. Okay. This if activity, minimize it. There's a if max consecutive activity. We will read about this. Let's minimize it. Next, you have the invoke init all application workflow. Now, inside this, when you go or open this workflow, this is where you will start process and all those activities you will put inside this XAML. Okay. Now, while opening this, if there is any kind of a problem, then there is a catch section which will catch that exception. Okay. And then finally, it is all blank. And if an exception is caught, then what happens? Here, the transition get activated. And in this transition, if you open, here it is written system exception is not nothing, and then it is typing what exactly happened. By system exception dot message, if you highlight this activity, there's a gray box coming down here, right? So here it is saying it is trying to type the exact message, and then it is also trying to source from where it happened. It is typing that error. So this is the basic understanding you should get, at least on the initiation activity, how the exception is handled at the start of initialization. If any exception comes, where it goes to the end process state. It comes here if an exception comes. After this, we have to learn what is this if first run, what is this if max consecutive, right? And invoke init all application, you understood. This is inside this, you are going to start a process. Like just now we did start process and open the UI demo application. Okay, now this too is important to understand. Next, we will study if first run. This is part of your initialization block, and after the assign activity which we saw, the next block of activities that you should be aware is the if first run. If you expand this if activity, inside that it is pretty simple. If the condition meets, what is the condition here? Configuration is nothing. I will talk about that a little later. If configuration is nothing, then this condition will work, and in the else there is no activity. So meaning only if the configuration is nothing, that is where it is going to go through this 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5. There are 5 activities with a log message. These are the activities you will only run when the condition is configuration is nothing. Meaning it is the very first run it is going to run. In that, the very first activity, I will talk about this config is nothing little later, but right now let's focus on this activity. If you open this activity, this says the primary screen resolution is screen.primary screen bounce.width. Means it will tell you what is the screen resolution, what is the width, and what is the height. What you will do, let's copy this activity to your test XAML and paste it here. And immediately you might see an error. What this error says, if I open this, expand this code, and you see there is an error. This says, if you highlight, it says screen is not declared. The variable screen is not declared. It's not able to recognize what that screen means when you are dragging this activity to a test. Now for this, what you have to do, you have to add a namespace. And how do you add a namespace in the new UiPath Studio is by going to the data manager. And in this one, there is something called namespace. And here you type system.windows.forms. Okay, click on it. So once you click on it, you see the error is gone. Now, if I'm going to do, you remember the shortcut, the keyboard shortcut, function F6, right? If you do this, see the execution has started and it has noted something in the output panel. Okay, if you click on this, what it said, the screen resolution of your laptop is 1920 into 1080. This is my screen resolution at the moment. And for your laptop, it could be slightly different or maybe the same. So this is the code. You need to have a understanding how this works. And it is going to put what is the resolution the current automation is running. Next, let's understand about the config file. Once you are in the main.xaml, let me go one step back. So this is your REFramework, and inside that you clicked on Initialization, and then you saw the assign activity, and now we are studying the first run. Inside that it talks about something called config. In REFramework there is a configuration file. To open the configuration file, click on the project icon. Okay, and in this one, let me collapse everything. So this is how the REFramework would look like. And then there's a filter option. What do you do? Click on this filter option, and the other should be selected. This one you should click on. Once you click on it, if you go to data, and then here you would find a config XLS file. Let's open this config XLS file and have a look of this file, what it contains. This is a configuration file that is required for your REFramework. There are three tabs. One is the settings tab, the second is the constants tab, and the third is the assets tab. So in REFramework, whatever value you provide, for example, you have created a queue. What is a queue? We are going to see it. You are going to put this automation in a specific folder in Orchestrator. What is that folder name? So all this you define here. This is a configuration file or settings file, you can call it. Okay, so this has got three tabs: settings sheet, constant sheet, and asset sheet. These are the three sheets. In the REFramework, it reads this file. For example, here if you see in the if activity, config is nothing. Now what is this config variable? Go to the data manager. In the data manager, if you see, there is a config variable, and this is a dictionary variable. Now you should have good knowledge on dictionary. I'm going to talk next on how the dictionary functions. To understand how a dictionary functions, let's drag and drop an assign activity. Just type assign and drag and drop this activity. And here let's create a variable, Ctrl+K, and say config. Once I have created the variable, I'll go to data manager in UiPath Studio and highlight the config, and I'm going to click on this and change the data type. For this you have to type system.collections.generic.dictionary. Okay, so this is the dictionary data type. What I'm going to do to understand, there are two things. One is a key, the other one is called a value. At this moment, ensure you put both things as string and click on OK. All right, very important for the developer to practice all these things. Once you have created, let's initialize the dictionary. So how do you initialize the dictionary? You say new dictionary of, in the bracket, of string comma string, meaning both my values would have string, and click on save. All right, now there should not be any error. If the data type is selected correctly, there won't be any kind of an error with this. This is the expression which I have written. After that, let's use a multi-assign activity. And here let's write something. For example, I'm going to say config, and inside the parenthesis and double quotes, I'm going to say India. So what is the capital of India? New Delhi. And on the value side, I'm going to say New Delhi. I'm going to add one more. Again, I'm going to use the same variable config, and inside this, I'm going to put another country name. For example, I'm saying France. Okay, so what is the capital of France? Paris. Let's add one more country, and here, so what I'm doing here, I'm repeatedly using the variable config, and I'm trying to enter few values inside that in a key and value pair. So what is this key? So the key here is the country name, like Japan, and what is the value here? Let's say Tokyo. So now if you look at, there are three different countries I've added: India, France, Japan, and on the right hand side, their capital names I have written. If I have to use this dictionary, let's use a message box and simply type the variable name config, and inside the parenthesis, I'm going to simply take the name of the country. Let's say I'm going to say India. Okay, the moment I'm typing India, and if I'm going to do a control F function F6, okay, just remember the keyboard shortcuts as a developer. So let me debug this. Now what should be the output? Because here I'm using the dictionary variable, you see. I'm just using the dictionary variable and it should be able to print me the value New Delhi. Getting it? For example, if I change it to France with the name of the key, this is the left side is called key, the right side is called value. So just I'm taking the config variable and the key name, and if I'm going to debug this, now this time the value should come Paris. So this is how the dictionary should function. You see, the value has come Paris. Next, let's see this. So by default, the config is a dictionary variable. If you see, this is a dictionary variable, right? And the value initially, it will be nothing. There is no data inside that. So it is nothing. And then it is logging a resolution screen resolution that we have seen it. The important part here is init all settings. So there could be questions to developers. What is the function of init all settings in REFramework? So the function of init all setting is it reads the configuration file of REFramework. And in the configuration file, what are the three different sheets we have seen? Settings, constants, and assets. So in the init all settings, it reads all these three sheets and it stores the value in the config dictionary. So what are the values? For example, if I go back to the Excel, in the Excel, for example, in the setting, I have created orchestra queue name and here I have typed the value of it. So this becomes your key, this becomes your value. So it gets stored in the dictionary. That's all it does for the constant. It does for the settings. It also does for the assets. So init all setting is the workflow which reads your config file and stores their values to a dictionary variable. That is the function. If you click on this particular button here, open an expression editor, there are three different variables created. One is the in config file, which is nothing but your XLX file. Just now we opened from the data folder. The next one, it is reading the first two sheets, the setting sheet and the constant sheet. And how it reads the asset, I'm going to show you. There is also an asset sheet, it reads directly. And then after reading all the data, like we did it for the country and its capital, right? So it stores the value into the config dictionary variable. So whenever you, whatever you want, you can use this config variable name and use it in your workflow. So that is the outcome of this init all settings. Now it is very important as a developer, at least you should have one look of this workflow, how everything functions. Okay, so how it functions, for that, first you collapse all. So there are how many sections? Log message, assign, for each, this one. These are the four sections are there. Let's open the very first section. So here it is saying initializing settings. It's a log message. Fine. After that, there is a assign activity where you are having a dictionary variable, and in the dictionary variable you are initializing the dictionary variable like we did just few minutes back. New dictionary of string, comma, object. This is the REFramework template, and there is a assign activity. After that, there is a for each activity. In this for each activity, here they have written a small comment. It reads the settings and constant. There are three sheets. The first two sheets it reads here, settings and constants, from the configuration file and add them to the config dictionary. Now if you expand this slightly, if you expand, let's expand this, just click on this, two activities are there. There's a read range activity, there are for each configuration activity. So it reads the data, and after reading the data, it passes that to the out underscore config, and the out underscore config would pass to the config variable, right? We saw just now. So all it is doing, if you simply have to remember, it is simply in this particular for each loop, it's reading all the data from the config sheet and the setting sheet. Okay, and what is the config sheet and setting sheet? This is the one, setting sheets and the setting sheets and the constant sheet. From this, it reads the data in the first for each loop. After this, there is another try initializing assets. This one is responsible. What you do, simply click on it once. Okay, you will see one by one activity. This one is reading the assets sheet. So there is asset sheet. Okay, and here it will read this value, the name. This is the value. Okay, so here if you see, it is reading the asset sheet, and there is a for each asset row, there's a data table. It is going through each row. Okay, and then after going through each row, there is a get asset activity, and based on the row asset, meaning here whatever name, the asset name you have provided, it is going to fetch that value and then look in the orchestrator whether the same name is there. So this we will function understand, but at the moment all you understand what it is doing, it is simply reading the data from the Excel file and storing into the dictionary. That's all it does. Okay, you can go through in detail, but on a high level as a developer, this is already created by UiPath. You don't have to worry about this much. All you need to know how it functions. Okay, so this is what it is doing. It is finally reading that entire Excel, and finally all the data is there in a variable called config, which is a dictionary variable. Next, we will see if in orchestrator queue name and if in orchestrator queue folder activities. So here are the activities after the invoke init all settings. These are your two activities. Now let's briefly understand what this does. Okay, so if you read this description, override queue name from the configuration file. Okay, let me go one step back. Okay, so what it's saying, override queue name from the configuration file in case the argument in orchestrator queue name is specified. So what it means, let me show you. If you open the config file, in the settings, you have something called orchestrator queue name and you have something called orchestrator queue folder name. In the earlier design, everybody used to use this config file, and here we used to put the values. With the new design, I'll show you after 2018. So the new design, if you go to data manager, here you have two arguments in orchestrator queue name, in orchestrator queue folder. If you pass a value here, let's say the queue name is test q1, let's the folder name is test folder 1. So if you're passing these values here, whatever values is there in the config file, it's not be used. These value what you pass in the argument will be used. Now the benefit of this, when I'm starting a process or a job from Orchestrator, I can pass a different queue name, a different queue folder name in case there is a change. I don't have to come and change the config file. That's why these two arguments are created wherein you can directly pass the value. So what is the use of this? If there is a value already specified in that argument, it will not use the config file, rather it will use the argument value. It is just passing the argument value to the config dictionary variable. Okay, here also the folder name, instead of reading it from the config file, it is passing the argument value from this, just now we saw, right? So it passes the argument value of the queue folder to the dictionary. So at the end, if you pass a value here, your config file will be overwritten, meaning the value that you have provided in the argument will be used, not the config file value. After this, the next activity is invoke kill all process workflow first run. So what it does is this activity where if you open this workflow, you can use the kill process activities and other things to kill any existing, let's say, browser, or let's say you want to close the application if it is already open on which you are going to automate. All these things can be put inside this. I mean, you can add other activities. We are going to anyway see that when we build the actual automation. After that, you have a add log, and every activity in REFramework, in case you forget or don't remember, always read this captions that are written here, okay, or annotations which are written here. Add the process name to the log, so it will just add, okay, which process has started. So like that, you can go through individually one by one. So right now what we have completed is the if activity, right? And after the if activity, there is something called if max consecutive system exception exceeded. This is again an if activity, but it has got a very important role. Now let's read the description. If max consecutive system exception number was reached, throw the exception at initialization and go to end process state. Meaning what? If I go back to the main and hit on this, let's say maximum system exception, what does it mean? When you are processing, while processing, let's say the application is closed. So what would happen? It will come to system exception. It will reopen the application and then it will continue. Again, it found the same issue. Again, it found the same issue. So what is happening? Continuously, the application gone into maintenance or there is some problem with the application. Now the further processing is not happening. It is repeating. In that case, there is an important variable called max consecutive system exception. And that variable is available in the config file. So this is the config file of REFramework, and here in the constants there is something called max consecutive system exception. Very important point. As a developer, you should be aware of this. Now what does it say? The number of consecutive system exceptions allowed. If max consecutive system exception is reached, the job is stopped. So when you are running the automation from Orchestrator, it will automatically stop. It understands, hey, it is continuously happening. Let me stop. Let me not continue the automation. To disable this feature, set the value to 0. So by default, this feature is disabled. 0 is set, means it will not work. Now let's say I'm going to put, it's a good practice to put some number here. Otherwise, if there is an maintenance or something happened, the automation would run, continuously run, and it won't be of any help. Hence, putting a number is important. So what generally people put 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. You can set 5 or 3 based on your need. Okay. Generally, I would recommend you to use this variable. So for example, if you're putting some value, let's say 1 you have put, meaning it after one system exception, it should go to end process state. If I'm putting 2, after 2 consecutive, remember the word consecutive means continuously, right? 2 if I put, if I type the number 2 here, meaning what? If 2 times the same exception is happening, system exception happening, it should go to end process state. It will stop the job. And how does it function? See, look at it. So here, if I open this, okay, so this 2 we have completed. I'll minimize them. Okay, here we are. If max consecutive system exception is exceeded, how this works? What happens here? There is a simple formula which is written, or expression which is written. Max consecutive system exception greater than 0. First condition is you have some value in the config file which should be greater than 0. That is first condition. And also the consecutive system exception greater than equals to, they are converting the value. For example, the value that you have put 2. Okay, so if it is greater than or equals to 2, that time only it should work. Now what would happen if the condition is met, first, second, and then the number met? So let's say I have put 2, it has met, then immediately it is going to throw a exception. And what is the exception here? New exception, config exception message. It will pass certain exception. Once the exception is thrown here, it will be caught by this assign exception, and the exception value will receive certain value, because you are throwing an exception here in the if activity. So all these are there inside the try catch. So what would happen in the try catch? The exception value is caught, and by this, here the system exception, this particular transition will get activated. We saw this demo, right? Initially, when the exception value is given something, it's get activated, and then it will go to end process state and it will stop. Getting it? Very important, so that you don't continuously get consecutive system exceptions. So in the initialization state, these are the important ones. Okay, so consecutive system exception, this you have understood. After that, there is something called invoke init all application. Generally, developers will get confused in 2 items. Inside this first run, there is something called init all settings. Settings means config file. After that, after you kill the process and after the consecutive system exception and all that, right? Below that, you have an activity called invoke init all setting. Now what this does, this is actually the area where your application initialization happens. We saw that in the test. In this one, this is where you will say start process, or you want to open up, whatever application will be utilized should be kept here. Any number of application you want to open and access and do certain activities, all this application you should actually put it here. We will see that practically, but for the moment you should have a good understanding of the init block. Okay, so what we have learned so far is the first block, which is very critical and very important function of REFramework, is the initialization block is now complete. Now, if everything goes well, if there is no exception, right, there's no exception, then it will come to the second block called get a transaction data. Okay, so this is the second block, and if you open this transaction, here it is written destination to, there is no condition given here. It will automatically come if everything goes well, there is no exception, it will automatically come to get transaction data state. So this is where it will pull one transaction and start processing this. This is very important. We will learn in detail after this one. Now it's important to learn the get transaction data. Coming back to our REFramework, we have studied the initialization step, and then now we are moving on to the get transaction data. This is very important to understand before you implement REFramework as a developer. I'm going to open this. So what is the main job of this get transaction data? Get the next transaction to be processed. Meaning you have a queue on which we will see how to upload the data. We will design a dispatcher bot and upload the data to the queue, and from the queue the data will come through this activity or through this state. So this is the main purpose. Now there are two things can happen. You have a data, you process it. You don't have any data, then it goes to end process state. Right? Two things. One is you have a data, you go about processing it. You don't have any data, you end process it. Let's say you have to process 100 records, right? So 99 record is processed. Then on the 100th record, what would happen? It will go to end process state. Means your task is done. This is the basic flow. Let's get inside the get transaction data. Now inside that, if you collapse it, you will see there is a sequence. Okay, there is a sequence. And inside the sequence, if I expand, there are two specific sequences. One is the check stop signal activity. If I expand this, now what is this check stop signal? When I am running the automation from Orchestrator and I would stop the job, then it will see, okay, somebody has stopped the job from the Orchestrator. They do not want to run it anymore. Hence, stop it. So this is a stop signal. This is an activity integrated with Orchestrator, and anytime in the Orchestrator you stop a job, this will understand that somebody has stopped it and I need to stop it here. This is to stop gracefully so that it doesn't enter about processing one more transaction. It stops gracefully. The moment it happens, for example, the stop signal, how to do that I am going to show you anyways during this video. But at the moment, let's understand when you receive the should stop signal, then it enters to this sequence. So this is a if activity if you highlight. And this if activity says it is checking the condition should stop. Now, if it is true, then what it should do? It should log a message saying somebody has stopped the process, stop process requested. It will log it. And then it will end the process. So how it end the process, you know it in the initialization state there was something called system exception is equal to nothing. Similar way here there is a variable called transaction item. There's no transaction item is equal to nothing, hence you should go to end process state. Let's go one step back, and here in the get transaction state, this is the transition. Now for transitioning it requires a condition. If I open this condition, here it is written get transaction data, okay, destination end process. Let me expand this, expand all, yeah. And then here if you see there is a condition return, transaction item is nothing. There is no transaction item to process. Hence you should stop it. So this is the variable, they are setting it to nothing and the process finished. It goes to the end process state. Okay, this is how logically it functions. Now imagine there is a data. So let's again go back into get transaction data. Okay, so this we have understood, stop signal, then it should stop it. It is setting the variable value to nothing and then it goes to the end process state. Else, if there is no stop signal, then what should you do? If there is no stop signal, then there is a invoke get transaction data workflow. This is very, very important. And below that, there is a catch section. What we will do, we will explore this get transaction data workflow. Anytime you see such a workflow, all you do first is you see what are the arguments inside this workflow. If I click on this one, it says there are multiple different arguments. Let's understand. The first thing, there is a variable called transaction number, and it is passing some value to in transaction number argument. Now this transaction number variable, by default, if I highlight this and go to data manager, you see the transaction number variable has a default value 1. The very first transaction would be 1, and after that the counter would increase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. So what it does, it is passing this value to in transaction number. Okay, this transaction number get increased in the process transaction state. The number is increased. Okay, we will see that. But this is one of the variable. After that config file, you have a dictionary file whose value has to be used, right? So it is passing the config. And then the very important variable in the get transaction data, your transaction item, which actually contains your atomic data, which has to be processed. For example, we saw in UI demo, it is entering what? It is entering the cash in, non-cash on as check and all those things, right? So this is the transaction item variable which will hold the value. We will also see everything in practical. It is important now to just to understand the logic. Okay, and then we have something called transaction field 2. What are these? These would contain additional data about your transaction item. Let's say you are processing an invoice, so it can have the invoice number, let's say the vendor number, any kind of a data you would like to have it, the transaction field, right, that you can donate to this variables. Okay, and then in case you are not dealing with queue, if you are dealing with queue, you are using this variable called transaction item. If I'm not dealing with queue, I'm dealing with Excel. I'm not uploading data to Orchestrator. I'm simply dealing with an Excel. Then this variable is used called DT transaction data. It is a collection of rows of data in an Excel from an Excel, right? Data table. It's a data table kind of a variable. Okay, means collection of rows. So these are the variables important and used in the invoke get transaction data workflow. Very important to understand how things function, okay, before you implement. Now let me open this workflow. If I open this workflow, the very first thing is it is logging the message get the transaction item, and then inside this there is a retry. Okay, this retry gets its value, you see, from the config. Retry number get transaction item. Let me show you the config file. In the config file, if you go to constants, there is a value here called retry number get transaction item, and by default the value is set to 2. It can be changed. Meaning, while retrieving the data from the queue, if something fails, it will retry 2 times. The number of times get transaction item activity is retried in case of an exception. While pulling from the queue there is some problem, then it will work. This is additional improvement done in the previous REFramework. If I remember, I think it was not there. It has been added newly. So if you see retry number get transaction item, this is the value it gets, and in case this get transaction item activity fails, it will retry. That is the importance of the retry activity here. Inside the retry there is a try block, and inside the try block the important activity for this entire thing is get a transaction item activity. Now what this activity does, get a transaction item from the specified orchestrator queue. So from which queue you have collected your data, from there it has to pull the data from the queue. So this is the activity is used to pull the data one by one in a queued manner. First it will pull the first one, second one, right? First in, first out. It follows the first in, first out principle. So it will pulls the data from the queue. Okay, and then here you have mentioned the folder path. Here you have mentioned the queue name from where it should pull it. Okay, all these things we will see. Implementation would be much easier than going through the entire flow. Okay, but again, it is important as a developer to understand everything. Now here, the output of this get transaction item activity is out underscore transaction item. out underscore transaction item. So if I go one step back to the main, and here if I click on this arguments, you see the out underscore transaction item is coming out of that workflow to a variable called transaction item, and this variable will be used in your process state. Okay, the value whatever it is fetching from the queue, it will be used in the process, the next step. So here you understood this is the important part of the invoke get transaction data workflow. Okay, if I open the workflow once again, okay, it fetches the value, and then in case there is an exception, it says could not retrieve the transaction item. Okay, and then it throws the exception, then it will retry once again, because there is a retry mechanism, right? So it will retry the same thing once again, whatever number you have provided in the config file. In case there is still a problem, right, then it will be handled. If I go one step back, then it will be handled. If there is any problem here, then it will be handled here. So if you see get transaction config log message get transaction data error, it could not get the error, and it will tell you what the problem has happened, and like that, and then it will say transaction item is equal to nothing, and then it will end the process. Okay, if something happens here. Clear? So this is the get a transaction data. There is one more important thing about the get transaction data workflow. Let me open this workflow. Inside this workflow, if you scroll down, there is one more activity. Okay, out underscore transaction item is not nothing, means if there is some transaction item, then there are few variables which are used. One is the transaction ID, transaction field 1, field 2. And there is a very important example given here to understand how to use it. These optional steps, these are the optional steps first of all, can be used to include more information about transaction item, and it is used mainly for logging and visualization purpose. What is the purpose? The purpose is to log or to for visualize. For that, if you need, you can use it, or else you can leave it. This is an optional thing. For example, if transaction item are invoices, you are dealing with invoice. The out underscore transaction ID, which has the ID, can be the invoice number. So all the invoice number can be your ID. Let's say you are dealing with employees. The employee ID could be your out underscore transaction ID. A specific unique value can be an ID. Out transaction field 1 can be the invoice date. Okay, there could be many values. Let's say the invoice date, you can put it as transaction field 1. And the out transaction field 2 can be the amount. What is the exact amount? So that you can utilize this for various logging purpose and various other things, right? So processed out underscore transaction ID, something like that you can write for logging purpose and other things. Okay, so that is why it is used. Write data to added log field that identify the transaction. Okay, add transaction information to log field. So here if you see, these are the now.toString transaction ID. By default it takes the date and time as the ID. If you want, you can change this to invoice ID, transaction item.id, whatever, specific content dot. So like that you can put the specific ID numbers here. String.empty. So here if you wanted to replace, you can put some other value here. Here also string.empty. This, I mean, it's not assigning anything. If you want, you can add the transaction item values into this and use it. Next, we will focus on the process transaction state. In the REFramework, we have studied initialization, get transaction data. Now it is the process transaction state. Very, very important. This is the core area which actually processes your data. Let me open this process transaction state. First of all, to get a complete understanding, I generally recommend that you collapse all just to see how it is framed. So this is a state activity, there's an entry, there's an exit, and there are a couple of transitions. What are the transitions? If there is any exception comes, then it goes to initialization. If there is a business rule exception, it did not follow a certain condition, let's say the email address is wrong, or so the customer did not have an proper email ID, or the phone number is not entered, any kind of a business rule exceptions, then it goes to pull up the get transaction data to pull the next transaction data and notify it somewhere to show to the business that Okay, there is some data wrong, you have to manually handle it. And if it is success, again it moves to the get transaction data. So there are three branches. This is very important. Process transactions data has got three branches. If it is success, it goes to get transaction data. If there's a business rule exception, it goes to the get transaction data. If there's an exception, then it goes to initialization state. This much you should have an understanding. Now let's get once again inside the process transaction state. Now let's expand the try block. So what is the main core activity of process transaction? It should process your data. That is the core activity, core job of this process transaction state. Let's expand one by one and see what are there inside the try catch block. So this is try, there's a catch, right? There are two catches and there's some finally which is blank. So now let's open the try. Now in the try, the very first thing is there is a assign activity. Okay, you see there's an assign activity. Now here, let me expand this. So here it is saying there is no exception, there is nothing. And if there is no exceptions, then you move. Okay, so it is saying the business exception by default when it starts is nothing. Next, there is a invoke process workflow. Now this is the process workflow or the process.xaml which actually processes your transaction. Inside this, you would write how to process your data. As a developer, this is where you will be mostly working. Invoke process workflow. Rest is more like a template for you. This is where you would be mostly working. Because it's a template, you don't have to do much modification. You are understanding how it works. After that, when you become as a RPA developer, when you work, you mostly have to work on the process.xaml. Now in this process.xaml, as I said, anytime you see this invoke word, it is very, very important to check the arguments by clicking on this button. Okay, now what are the things it takes? It takes the transaction item and the config file. The item which has to process and the config file has the data. Okay, let me close this and let's open this workflow. And if you see, it has a log message and here you have to write your steps. For example, type into, click on this button, click on this icon, right? Whatever the process part is there, here this is where the developer generally spends the maximum time in the REFramework. This is where they redevelop, right? They develop the entire automation in this particular XAML. Most of the thing, I'm not saying this is the only place, but this is the area maximum time is spent by the developer in the process.xaml. Okay, let's close this. After that, what happens? So while you are processing your data, imagine you are entering the data one by one from the Excel to an application. Now, while entering, there could be many problems like the application frozen, right? Or the data that is not present, or the data has certain rule like we saw. If the total value is increasing by 10,000, then you should notify. So there could be many such conditions may arise while processing the data. Now to handle this, that's why it is kept inside a try catch block. Now one thing certainly can happen, your processing can be successful. It can successfully process the data. For example, it has entered all the data and submitted the data in the application. Now that is called a success state. There are three states: success, business application, business exception, and application exception. These are the three states. According to that, the flow transitions to different areas. We saw that. Now here let's focus on the very first state where the data is processed successfully. Now what would happen if the data is processed successfully? There's one more try catch block inside a try catch block. And here what it is doing, if I expand this data, here there is a invoke set transaction status activity. Meaning it will set your queue transaction item to success. Hey, I have processed this data successfully. It will mark it in the queue. That is the use of invoke set transaction status here just below the process workflow. Getting it? Now while doing this, if there is any problem, again there is a try catch block to handle it and log it. Set transaction status failed. While setting it, it failed. If there is any problem here, there is again a try catch block. So the very first thing we saw, after processing, it could be success, hence it has to mark the transaction as success. Now while processing, There could be also problems, the business rule exception. For example, we saw a business rule. If the total amount is greater than 11,000, do not submit. You should mark it as a business rule exception. So for that, there's an activity called throw activity which we have to use. And using the throw activity, when you throw an business rule exception, everything I will show you. While you throw it, what would happen? Here there is a catch section called business rule exception. UiPath core dot business rule exception. This will catch that throw, the business rule exception that you have thrown. After catching it, what would happen? It is going to set the business exception as exception. Whatever you have thrown, it will catch it. And then it will again using the same invoke set transaction status and setting the business rule exception BRE. What, for example, you said the amount has exceeded 11,000, amount has exceeded 10,000. So that message will be logged by the robot, by the automation into a summary report, so that the business would know, okay, there is something went wrong. Okay, fine. You getting it? So this is the set transaction status happens here. Okay. There is also one more kind of exception. Any unhandled exceptions, like while processing the application got closed, the application did not respond, or something happened on the application, or any kind of any other exception which is not a business rule. In such a case, here that exception will be handled. And here if you see, there's one more invoke set transaction status. So how many times we have used this workflow? The same workflow has been used 3 times: at the success time, business rule exception time, and the application exception time. 3 times we have used it. Okay, and here if you see, invoke set transaction status has been used again to log the any kind of exceptions. Again, while handling this, if there is any problem, it is again put inside a try catch block to handle. If there is any problem while setting the status, then it will write some message: set and status XML failed, exception message so and so. So this is the new framework which is more robust. A lot of more try catch blocks are implemented to handle all different kind of situations. Okay, now it is very important, as we have understood the process.xaml. Okay, that's all. And then it goes to where, if it is a system exception, it goes to initialization state. If there's a business exception, it goes to get transaction data. If it is a success, it goes to get transaction data. This all we have learned. Now what is important, very very important, is how the set transaction state XAML. Okay, this, it is used 3 times, right? After the process.workflow, here it is used, and the business rule exception in the catch section, and the application exception. How this one works, invoke set transaction status.xaml, what are the things written inside, how it functions, is very very important to learn. Next we will focus on invoke set transaction status success. So we saw there are 3 invoke set transaction. We'll be looking at this one. Before you get inside this workflow, I am going to click on the arguments just to have a quick look. No need to remember anything, just have a quick look just to see what are the arguments I used. Definitely one of the important argument is your transaction item, on which it will say, okay, this transaction is success, right? So this is one. Transaction ID, transaction field, system exception is definitely nothing because it is a success criteria, config data. So all these things are passed into the workflow. No need to remember anything. It is a template already created for you. All you have to do is have a look. After that, let's open the workflow. Now, when you open the workflow, if you open any of this transaction status, there are 3 criteria. It could be success, it could be business exception, it could be system exception. At the end, all the workflows comes here. For example, if I go back to the main, and here there is a business rule exception. If you open this workflow, it will again open the same workflow. Okay, so all the 3 are integrated to call the same workflow, where this is the workflow present with the conditions. So what happens here? It checks there is no business exception, there is no system exception. Then you come here to the success block. This is the sequence. If there is a business exception is not nothing, Okay, meaning there is no business. If there is a business exception, right, then if it is true, it comes here. If there is no business exception, it comes to system exception. So this is the block diagram. Let's open the success one first to understand how it functions. The very first thing, what I always tell you, to collapse it so that you get a fair idea of how it is logged. So what you see, there is a if activity and there is a sequence. This is a sequence. There's if activity and there's a sequence. Now, if you go inside the if activity, the first condition what is written, the transaction item is not nothing. Matlab, there is some transaction item, and also transaction item get type is get type UiPath core.q item. It should be a q item, then only it will come here. That is the first condition. Now if it comes here, then what we will do, retry set transaction status. There is a retry block. This retry block gets a value. You see on the right hand side on the property, this gets value from retry number set transaction status from the config. Now let's have a look at the config file. This is the config file, and here if you see retry number set transaction status, by default it is set to 2. While setting the transaction, if there is any problem, it will retry twice. That is the goal of having a retry block here. Inside the retry block, we have a try catch. If I expand this try catch, what you see in the try, there is a set transaction status. Let's open this. And this is an activity related to Orchestrator. If the transaction item is success, it is going to mark it as successful. You see the status has been written as successful here. So it is going to mark the transaction successful if the transaction is successful in coming here. This is the very important activity called set transaction status, which is an orchestrator activity for the queue where the transaction item would be marked as successful. While doing this, if there are any kind of exceptions, then you have the catch section. And the catch section is going to log it, could not set the transaction status with the required message. And then it is going to rethrow this error so that the retry would again try once again to try to set the transaction. If in the second time also if it fails, right? If it fails, then it is going to log it. Okay, it has failed, then it will come out of it. It could not set and it will come out of the retry block. So this is about your if activity. Let's minimize the if activity. After that, you have a log message. What this log message does, it is adding our transaction log fields. So there are 5 items. If you click on it, transaction status, transaction number, transaction ID, transaction field 2. So this is going to log all the values so that you know for which transaction the success is marked. So there will be a log in your orchestrator. Okay, and then there is also a log message in config log message success to string info, and then so it will mark a log message successful, and after that it is going to remove the transaction. So what is the goal of this? It includes custom log fields to log message. They are removed. You see there is again a remove transaction here. Why they are getting removed? They are removed after logging to prevent duplicated status messages, to prevent any kind of a duplicate status message so that the same value is not carried over again. That's why after you add, you also remove it. Next we will see setting a transaction status in case of a business rule exception. For that, we will close this, go one step back, and here you have the business exception. If I open this business exception, it again follows the same structure, similar structure with slight different activities, property values of the activities. So here there is a if condition, and here also it's saying, okay, it has to be an orchestrator queue item. Then you have a retry. Inside that you have a try catch block, and then you have a set transaction status. Now what is the difference? The activity is the same. Here they have named it as business. You can type it whatever you want. So here it is written business exception by the template. However, the activity remains the same. So what is the difference here? If you look at the properties of it. So the status reason is selected here, failed. And the reason here is given in underscore business exception dot message. Whatever the messages is coming from there, it is coming. And if you see the error type here, it is selected business. So these are the 3 important changes that you would see in this activity. If there is any problem, again there is a catch section to handle that, exactly what we saw. It will log it and then it will try to rethrow it. So the retry once again tries it to the same section of activities. So this is about if activity. Then we saw a log message adding the additional log fields, exactly same like what we saw previously. And then you have, it will log the message. If you look at this expression, it will give you a little more detail. In config log message business rule exception. So config log message business rule exception, from where it is coming. So here it will have business rule exception. Here it is, the value is business rule exception, meaning it will say business rule exception plus in business exception dot message. What is the exact message? What is the, why you think it is a business rule exception? Meaning, for example, the email ID is incorrect, right? Or the phone number is incorrect, or the phone number is not provided, or it is in the blocked list, something like that. So anything which the business has to have a rule. We saw an example, the total amount should not cross 10,000. That could be a business rule exception. So those things can be added here. It will log it and then it will remove the logs. You saw the reasons why we have to remove it. Now after this is done, what is important is, here it is a success criteria, this is a business exception, so it has to move to the next transaction. So there is a additional block here for these two blocks. There is an additional block here called increment transaction index. So what it does, let's have a look. Assign IO transaction number. So what is doing? Increment the transaction number to get the next transaction to proceed. So here, if you see, it is adding a +1. Let's say the transaction number is 1. Next time when it runs, it becomes 2. Next time when it runs, becomes 3 if it comes to these blocks. Success or business exception. Okay, here the increment happens. This could be a question where the increment happens of the transaction number. This happens in the set transaction status.xaml under the success and business rule exception block. If I expand this, IO retry number is set to 0 so that it can start from the beginning. Reset the counter of retries to allow the text transaction to be retried correct amount times. Okay, again it can, the value is reset back to 0. For the next transaction, it will freshly start. Same thing, consecutive system exception is put to 0. If there was any exception and then it succeeded, then it will again reset it back to 0. Here also the system consecutive system exception get reset under the set transaction status block. Very, very important logical points to remember. Next, let's focus on system exception block. Very, very important block. This will work when there are application exception while the bot is working. The application cannot log in, the button is frozen, it's not visible, any kind of problem with the application. This is the block which is very important, which is going to function. Let's open the block and read everything one by one. Now to keep it simple, what you can do, let's expand all and collapse all. So when you collapse all, it gives you the fair view of what are the activities are used in a sequential order. So if you have a first have a high level look, so it is logging something, then there is a query retry, there is a boolean variable, I will show that. Try taking screenshots. It takes a screenshot if there's an application exactly where it happened, you want to see that. It takes a screenshot, right? If transaction item is a queue item, system exception, then what to do? Add transaction logs, increment consecutive system exception number, right? So where the system executive number incremented, it is in this system exception block, right? Add log fields, remove transaction log fields, and then try closing the application. So this is where it closes the application if there is a system exception. So this is the overall flow. Now let's open one by one and read them carefully. The first one is the log message. What exactly it is trying to tell us? Consecutive system exception counter is IO consecutive system exception dot toString. Okay, so initially it could be 0, then the increment can happen to 1 if the very first time problem happened. Second time consecutive it is happening, it is becomes 2, 3, 4 like that. Okay, so now this variable, it is trying to give a log. After that there is a query retry. Now this is a boolean variable. How do you find it? If you go to this variable panel, you see it is a boolean kind of a variable. So it is telling you, okay, are you using the queue item or not? If you see, there is a condition here. In transaction item is not nothing. Not nothing means there is something. Remember, very simple. So transaction item is there, value is there, and it is a queue type of item. In transaction get type is equal to UiPath core.queue item. It should be a queue item. So what would happen? The value queue retry will become true. And this is used little later. Okay. Down here it is used. I will show that. Now, the important part here in the set transaction status is taking screenshots. Okay. Now here what happens? There is a XAML. What is the XAML name? Take screenshots.xaml. What is the XAML name? Take screenshot.xaml. And where do you find all the XAMLs in REFramework? So if you click on this framework, you see all the different XAMLs are there. Take screenshot.xaml, you see. Okay, this is where it is invoked. They are created individually and they are invoked here. Modular design. So here if you see, the invoke take screenshot workflow is written here. Very important, anytime you go into the workflow, it is important to understand the arguments. First argument is a in folder argument. Now what is the in folder argument? It is using a value from the config file called x screenshot folder path. If I go back to the Excel and click on the constants, here you have this value x screenshots folder path, and this is the place where you have to give the path like underscore C drive forward slash whatever your folder, right? You have to give the full path or the relative path, you have to provide it here. Now whatever values are there in the config file, which variable is going to get this argument is going to get it in underscore folder, and it will be used inside the workflow. This another in out kind of a argument which passes the value to screenshot path. Now if you look at what is the screenshot path, click on this. So this is a string variable. It will just have the path of the where exactly the screenshot is stored. Okay, now let's open the workflow. So you don't have to remember many things. The template is there, we have to use it. Okay, but it is good at least to spend a couple of hours just to have a good knowledge of the framework. That's what we are trying to do it now. Here, take screenshot. This is the take screenshot activity. This activity, what they are saying, take the whole screenshot, indicate on screen, take the entire screenshot. So whatever is there, it is going to capture it. And then there is a if activity. This if activity is checking, hey, initially your IO path, because it's an in out argument. So if you leave it blank, if you have leave it blank, if you leave it blank, what would happen? It is checking string is null or empty IO file path. Okay, if it is empty, then what it's trying to do? The exception screenshot is writing a log. Okay, in folder is your config variable, the argument that we have from the config value, it will get the entire path. Okay, it will combine the path, this and then write exception screenshot, and then it will put a date and time dot png. So it is the full path including the screenshot with the .png extension. That is what this block is doing. After that, initialize screenshot info. Screenshot file info. Okay. Now, if you look at what kind of a variable it is, screenshot file info is a file info kind of a variable which will have the information around the file path, right? Everything. So new file info IO file path. So this is the screenshot file info variable. Now let's look at the if condition. Not directory exists screenshot file info directory. So file info is a variable. It will have all the details of the file like date, time, when modified, last modified, everything. Okay. So here they are using the directory name and then checking not, and then here if screenshot folder does not exist, then it will create it. That is the purpose of it. If that doesn't exist, it will create one. Then save the screenshot. This is important. So it is going to where it is going to store the screenshot in the file path, wherever whatever you have mentioned. So technically what exactly I have to do as a developer is I have to just put the file path and forget it. It will do the rest of the part. Okay. Now log message. So basically I don't have to spend too much of time in coming here and editing things. I just know how it works. That's important. Then log message, screenshot saved at IO file path. It will have a log message. Very simple. Okay. So getting it. So this is how the take screenshot works. Let's go one step back. Now after while working on this workflow, if there's any problem, there is a try catch block to handle it and log it. Okay, that's about it.
It's not opening. Let me open. So fail to take screenshot, exception message, it is going to type the log. Okay, don't have to remember the entire code, pretty simple, just that understanding how it functions. Okay, let's go back once again. All right, so until here we got it. Next is invoke transaction item is a queue item, system exception, queue retry. I told you this, there is a variable true or false they have written here, right? If your transaction item has some value and it is a queue item, then what you do, here it comes. If transaction item is a queue item, means if it is true, then you do this rest of the part. So there's a retry, and inside that there is a try catch block. This is a new, retry blocks are used multiple spaces in the REFramework, so that if something happens, it can still retry. And then set the transaction status. Okay, and then it will set the, this is the important area. This is where it sets the transaction. If it is a queue item, then only you set the transaction. If it is a data row or some other mail message, right, which is not used, sorry, data row which is using an Excel, then it is not using queue, then you don't have to set a transaction status in the queue. Hence, this condition is very, very important. Now, if you look at it's the same set transaction status activity, and on the property panel, they have written few things. Error type is application. You see, error type is application, and here the status is failed and is going to write a message, exception message so and so at source, where the exact error message happened is going to note it here. This is very important. If you want to make little changes to your messages, probably as a developer, you may have to come here and make little modification, whatever you like to. Got it? So this is where you have to come. Now assign retry number. Now what is this block? Assign retry number from queue. Now in your queue, you might have enabled the retry number 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'm going to show you where you enable that, right? Later part of the video or in the next video. IO retry number. So here what is happening? It is going to retry dot number, whatever that count is, 2, 3, it is going to have that here. Okay. And there's a cache section. While doing this, if there's a problem, it will handle it. Okay. And then we have a R transaction log field. We have seen it in the previous one. Increment consecutive exception counter. This is important. That, if I ask a question where your system consecutive system exception variable value is increased, and you remember this value, very important. Okay, max consecutive system exception, the number of consecutive system exception allowed. So 3, if I put only continuously 3 times, if it happened, it is going to stop it. Very, very important. Many times, if there is a problem in the application, you have 100 transactions, all your 100 transactions will fail. You don't want that. What you want to do is you can enable this consecutive, very important, everybody should use it. Okay, so should not keep it to 0, put some number here, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you feel like, put it. If continuously the same error is happening, the job is going to stop. Okay, it'll go to end process and stop, and then somebody can intervene and understand, okay, what went wrong. So very important here. Then the next one is invoke retry current transaction workflow. Okay, so this is the retry current transaction workflow. Let's see the arguments: config file, retry number, transaction number, system exception, queue retry, count 2, 3, whatever it is, right? And then we'll go to the workflow. And here the retry transaction is a long workflow we need to understand. So let's spend another 5 minutes just to quickly see. Retry transaction. What is the condition here? Config max retry. Okay, max retry. So it's meeting the condition. It did not, meaning it did not cross that max retry number. Let's say 2 you have put, it is still there. Okay, it's not, okay, convert max retry greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, max retry is reached. Okay, if is not greater than 0, then you do this. Convert to integer in config max retry number. So what is the max? So this is consecutive system exception. There is another thing called max retry number. These are two different things. Max retry number, what is the definition? Must be 0 if working with orchestrator queue. That's all you need to remember. So it has to be 0. So if the value is greater than 0, meaning you are not using queue. If you are not using queue, log message. Write the specified diagram. So let's open this. So here what they are writing, log message application exception, to string system exception at source. It is just logging that message. Now let's go one step back. Here increment the transaction number. So now I am processing transaction 1, I have to go to transaction number 2, because if I'm using queue, what happens? The set transaction activity application exception, it will automatically create one more line item in your queue. That is how the design is. So if one row has failed in the queue, it will automatically add one more new item for a retry purpose on the top of the queue. Hence, you don't have to do anything here. It will just go and increment transaction number. When that number would come, it will process it. Okay. Now here, if it is yes, that means you are using your Excel or something like that, then it will follow this path. Okay. So I'll not go into detail. You can spend a little time here. Okay. Now let's close this. Now important, the retry current transaction workflow, where it is there in the system exception block. Okay. In the system exception block, it is there. Now let's open it. Remove transaction log field and then try closing the application. The soft closing of the application happens here in this system block, right? In this block only this happens. If I go one step back, process transaction, right? Now we are focusing on the system exception block, right? This is the system exception block. It will again take you to the same workflow. And then if you go one step back, this is where it happens, all the things, right? So let's open it again. Okay, so here it is going to close. So what are the arguments? No arguments. Here you have to define. You as a developer, here you have to define, okay, what are my application I have to close, what variables I have to pass. This would be the work. So you're understanding, when we are knowing everything, you know where are your responsibilities lies, and when a customization or some changes has to be done as a developer, you have to come to the spaces or the areas and make the changes or develop the code. Clear? So now what happened? We have completed this set transaction starters workflow. This is very, very important, and one must spend time before trying to implement REFramework. Definitely a lot of time is required. If you are very first time you are spending time to understand REFramework, definitely you have to spend a lot of time to understand each of these things part by part. Next, the final thing we are going to learn is the end process state. So there are four blocks basically in REFramework: initialization, get transaction state, process transaction state, the final is end process state. Now tell me when the workflow would come to end process state. There are two answers. One, when there is a system exception occurred in the initialization block, it will come to the end process state. This we have read in the beginning. If you want to refresh yourself, please open this block and identify how it comes to the end process state. Second, when all my transactions or all my queue items are processed, then also it will say, okay, everything I processed, no data, then end. It will come to the end process. These are the two stages. If I open the end process, there is a try catch block. And if you expand it, inside the try, there is a invoke close all application.xaml. This we saw. This the developer has to define in the XAML. In the XAML, you have to. So how do you update your XAMLs? Go to the project panel, open it here, close all application XAML, and then update it here. So wherever this is used, this XAML is used twice. You saw that in the. So wherever it is used, it is going to use the same module. So single time coding used multiple times. Now let's go one step back. Okay, so here we are in the end process state. Okay, let me also close the previous tabs. Here it is going to close. Now while closing, if it fails, then what you should do, you should kill it, like it happens on a laptop. We are trying to close the application, it doesn't close, then we will use the task manager to kill it. Similar way, similar function is written here. Next, this is the in the finally section. So you might have not seen the try is used, the catch section of the try catch block is used, and then there's a finally section, right? So how this is used, we are going to see it. Now look at if system exception is not, this is very, very important. I'll tell you, this has got a lot of importance. There is an activity called terminate main workflow, and you can provide a reason. Terminate the running workflow instance, raises the system activities workflow application completed event in the host and reports error information. So this is a terminate activity used. However, the most important is the condition how they have written. Now to understand the condition, first of all, you need to understand the config file value for should mark job as faulted. Very important. Now what is this? You can put two different values here. You can write true or you can write false. By default, it will be false. If you write true, what is the benefit? I'll tell you. If the value is true and an error occurs in the initialization state, some system exception occurred, it went to end process state in the initialization block, or the max consecutive system exception is reached. So you have put this variable, so I recommend people to use it. Like I gave the example, you have 100 records, there's an application failure, none of the records are getting entered into the data into the application because there's a button is grayed out or the button moved somewhere else, and the bot is saying application exception, I could not find the button, I could not find the button. Now this can happen for 100 records. Do you want it? No. If you set the max consecutive exception to certain number, it is going to stop it gracefully, and then your job will you'll get to know, okay, why, what happened, why my queue item is not still processed, and then you can realize and act on it. So here when you put this value to true, what happens? If the initialization block something happened, then also you have to act, your automation did not run. If the max consecutive system exception is also reaching, there is also certain big problem going on. So there also we have to act. So keeping this true, for me, I would use if I'm a developer. But again, it depends on the situation when to use. Okay, so this take your decision, but I would feel this is a very, very helpful option to mark it as true. And that is what this is written here in the condition. What they have written, system exception is not nothing, means there is something. Not nothing means there is something. So there is a system exception, means coming from the initialization block. Config is nothing, or it is coming from the get max consecutive system exception is reached from the process transaction and hitting the end right because of the max consecutive system exception. If it is hitting that, then what would happen? Get transaction data, and then it as per the condition flow, right? A system exception in from the initiation block, it will hit the end process state when the max consecutive exception is reached, correct? So when it reaches, should mark job as faulted is the variable from the config is read. So if you have put it true, then what it will do, if it condition is true, it will execute this activity called terminate main workflow. So your job would be marked as faulted. So it will create an alert. Very, very important. So that's about the end process state. So far we have learned all the states. This is theory. Now, what happened? I think the video had gone very, very long. I will try to upload one more video where I would see as a developer, how can I use this REFramework? How can I build a dispatcher model? How can I build a performer model using the same REFramework? What are the small changes I have to do? We'll have a basic example and how to queue item, how to use it. All these things practically we will do it in another video. So thank you for watching, having patience until here to listen to me. Okay, please do let me know who all did really listen to me till here. Definitely it requires a lot of patience. Thanks a lot. Let's meet once again in our next content.